This lesson contains audio narration. Please connect your headphones, or turn on your speakers. Click on the play button to begin the lesson. These are the key objectives that you can expect to achieve after completing this lesson. List the qualifications, functions and duties of a welding inspector. The terms listed are related to welding inspection. Roll over each to see its definition. Inspection of assemblies fabricated by arc welding involves many factors that cannot be covered by any particular code or specification. These factors include not only the fundamental principles of the actual operation of welding and a knowledge of common weld faults, but also related subjects associated with the process, such as basic properties of welds and parent metal, testing methods and interpretation of drawings and specifications. Ensuring quality of products and services has never been the sole realm of the inspector. Quality cannot be inspected into anything, it must be built into the product or service. All employees are part of the quality process. The role of the inspector is to prevent errors from occurring and increase the assurance of the system or component's service performance through enhanced verification. An inspector acts as a responsible representative of an organization that may be the manufacturer, the owner, or some outside agency. Decisions are governed by some form of written list of clearly defined requirements. These criteria must be interpreted both as to limitations and intent. Due to the variety of welded structures requiring inspection, no one class of inspector is expected to be proficient in all types of inspection. A shop inspector employed by a fabricator makes routine checks of materials, dimensions, workmanship, finish and other details to ensure that design requirements are met. An inspector cannot possibly check every detail of a project. Such checks must be limited to spot checks or random samples, unless the inspector has reason to believe that code or specification requirements are not being met. The inspector should enter a shop or field site with two main thoughts in mind: to obtain a product fabricated in compliance with the applicable standard or specification, and to expedite the completion or erection and delivery as much as possible. While the prevention of errors is the function of inspection, the main advantage of welding inspection is its ability to catch problems before they impact quality or delivery. An inspector should have excellent eyesight and his or her physical strength and agility should be sufficient to permit efficient work. The inspector should be familiar with standards, particularly the standard which governs the work being inspected, and should have good judgment in the interpretation and application of standards. The inspector should have had actual experience in the inspection of welding, and it is always advantageous for him or her to have had personal experience in welding. The inspector should be competent to determine, by observing the actual welding operation, whether an operator is securing proper fusion and penetration. The inspector should know what constitutes an acceptable weld, what conditions are likely to create defects, and how to detect any defects that may occur. The inspector should be conversant with filling material specifications, and know the general application and limitations of various classifications. The inspector must be familiar with various non-destructive tests for welding and be able to accurately interpret and evaluate the results of such tests. An inspector's temperament should be such that they can cooperate with the manufacturer and preserve professional relations between the fabricator and purchaser, while obtaining the required results. He or she must at all times be honest in his or her work and dealings with the manufacturer. An inspector must be familiar with reading drawings, should thoroughly understand welding symbols and should also be able to write complete, concise and clear reports. The duties of a welding inspector will, for most industries, follow the general sequence of fabrication and will relate to those details pertaining directly to the welding operations, routine checks of materials, dimensions, and workmanship. Some of these duties are outlined as follows: interpretation of drawings and specifications, verification of procedures, and personnel qualifications, checking applications of approved welding procedures and repair welding procedures, selection of production test samples, and the interpretation and evaluation of test results, and preparation and maintenance of records and reports. The inspector may be called on to interpret that portion of the drawing and specifications concerned with the welding operations, and has a duty to study those documents in advance to display confidence in the execution of his responsibilities. This confidence will reduce or eliminate hesitancy in decisions and will serve to assist in meeting the project's schedule. Situations may arise where deviations from drawings and detailed specifications occur during fabrication or installation. Where such deviations are warranted, the inspector may be called on to obtain official approval for such changes from the agency responsible for the design and specification. Where a formal system of processing deviations exists, the inspector may be required to assist the reviewing group when it processes the deviation report. The inspector's personal records must be organized, clear and concise. One of the requirements of standards and specifications pertaining to welding is that the fabricator details the intended welding. A recipe after welding. These documents are called welding procedure data sheets, or welding procedure specifications depending on the code of construction. The reasons for this requirement and the importance of adhering to such procedures are complex. It is sufficient to state here that the requirements have a legal basis, and that aside from these procedures, they are absolutely necessary to control the welding operations and the quality of the final product or service. Prior to welding being carried out on a contract, it is the duty of the inspector to verify that welding procedure and performance qualifications have been established and approved. Approvals may be either internal to the organization performing the fabrication, or more commonly, external, client, jurisdiction, others, or both. Prior to using a welding procedure specification for production welding, or using it to qualify personnel, the procedure must be qualified by testing. Typically guided bend, tensile, impact or break testing is conducted and results are documented on a procedure qualification record. The inspector must ensure that any changes made in the procedure do not exceed the limits prescribed by essential variables defined in the applicable standard. Where essential variables are exceeded, the procedure or procedures are changed accordingly. The inspector would then be involved in assessing whether requalification of the procedure is required. The requalification must be completed and approved before proceeding with the relevant joints. Standards and specifications pertaining to weldments usually require that welders and welding operators be qualified in accordance with prescribed procedures. It is the inspector's duty to see that each welder or welding operator working on a contract has been properly qualified, and that they carry out work only within the limits of their qualifications. The qualification of personnel is to document that a person has sufficient skill to perform the work and assists in determining that the qualified procedure is being properly and competently applied. Fabrication practices vary and are not consistent between jobs or companies, therefore, adherence to procedures is the only way to ensure that welded products are in full compliance with requirements. It is essential that the inspector be fair and exercise sound judgment when applying visual or other inspection procedures, and when assessing the acceptability of welding. In some types of welded fabrication, inspection of the finished product may be performed on samples selected by the inspector from production. The selection of such samples may be defined in the contract specification or left to the judgment and discretion of the inspector. Various tests or treatments may be prescribed for these samples, such as radiography, hydrostatic tests, stress relieving, etc. It is the inspector's duty to see that these tests are properly carried out in accordance with the applicable standard or specification. When the various tests have been performed in accordance with the requirements, the inspector must evaluate the results and decide whether they meet the specified requirements. If they do not meet the acceptance standards in every detail, a thorough study of the results and requirements must be done before an acceptance or rejection is made. This acceptance or rejection must be recorded and, where necessary, communicated to the owner or design authority for disposition. Any work performed to a specification or code that requires tests will also require detailed records. However, whether records are required or not, the inspector should keep adequate notes of all inspection work. It is also the inspector's duty to check the records and ensure that they are complete, accurate, in accordance with requirements and available as and when required. The reports and records should be written in a clear and concise form so that management, design or whoever else may be concerned will have no difficulty interpreting their meaning. It is also necessary that the inspector be able to understand his own reports when they are the only available record months or years later. Now that we have reviewed the material, let's see what you can remember. Click the play button to check your understanding. Have completed this lesson. You are now able to list the qualifications, functions and duties of a welding inspector,